Hey guys, welcome back to the beginner lesson series. This is going to be a quick video with some helpful tips on playing bar chords. Bar chords are something that when everybody gets into learning guitar, they've maybe heard about it before they started playing, or certainly will hear about it soon enough. And it's kind of a rite of passage in a sense, because it's just this thing that is a little bit of a hump to get over, or an obstacle, because it requires a little bit more strength in that left hand. But that's one of the misconceptions about it, where I see a lot of people trying it for the first time, and myself included. Didn't have anybody guiding me with it, and I found myself really trying to mash the strings down, and that's not what it is about. So we're just going to be in fifth position here, dealing with a few different shapes, which we're going to be covering in more detail in the videos to come. So I'd say the biggest mistake that most folks make when learning bar chords is thinking that it just requires an immense amount of strength and grip and pressure. And that's definitely not the case. It does require a little bit more than standard open position chords, or non-bar chords for that matter, but not to the point to where you're tiring out and not able to play anymore, right? So you don't want to just force yourself to get strings to ring out just by applying more pressure and then more pressure and then more pressure. You're going to hurt yourself that way, and obviously that's not that you won't be able to sustain that for a long period of time, and sometimes you do have to play bar chords for a long period of time. This is something that applies to guitar playing in general. We want to use just the right amount of pressure that is needed and not any more, because we want to be able to sustain playing for a long time. I'm doing this on acoustic. It might be ideal for you to start out with an electric guitar. You're going to get a little less resistance from the strings, assuming both guitars, are, whether it's acoustic or electric, are set up properly. The electric guitar is going to give you less resistance, and that would probably be a more ideal place to start, but all the information is going to apply in the same way. Acoustic guitar strings are just in a little bit higher tension and can be tougher to get some of those strings to ring out, so that might be another reason why you find yourself in kind of a wrestling match with the guitar neck to get some of these things to sound out. So take into account what guitar you're playing. So we're just going to sit here in fifth position and go over a few chords that we're going to cover in more detail in some follow-up videos, like I mentioned earlier. And just kind of give you some tips to think about. Really not too much. I would say the best tip is just get away from thinking that you need excessive pressure, right? And try to use a little bit of finesse and perhaps logic of how the hand is holding a position on the neck and things that you can manipulate. So here is a big 6-string bar chord. This is a major shape, and it's based off of the E major chord, but this is an A major chord. I'm going to go over this in more detail in the next few videos, but just so you know what frets I'm on, going from string 6 to string 1, I'm on 5, 7, 7, 6, 5, 5. So that bar, my index finger, is taking care of 3 strings, string 6, string 2, and string 1. So, like I said earlier, you are going to need a little bit more pressure because that index finger is playing more than just one string. So the thumb position is going to be super important here. You need the thumb to support the pressure on the guitar neck in a balanced manner. So these fingers don't really need to press any harder than they normally do. The index finger is kind of being pushed beyond what it normally would do without a bar. All right, so that thumb needs to be positioned in a way that it can balance the pressure of the hand. I have a little bit more pressure on the index finger, so I'm kind of catering to that and letting that thumb position a little bit closer to the index finger, whereas fingers 2, 3, and 4 are good to go. If I have my thumb over here, then my index finger is going to start getting pretty weak, and my hand is also kind of contorted here, and things are starting to get a little painful. Same thing if I'm way over here, I see a lot of people playing with their thumb just kind of out to the side like that and then kind of twisting on the neck. You're going to find it difficult to do anything different with your fingers other than just like mash the strings down. And that's going to be the same story if we ride that thumb up over the neck or position too low. So I've got my thumb positioned around the middle of the neck. Thumb is a little bit more extended, so I can post up on the pad here and get a little bit of pressure on the back of that neck. I'm not trying to put excessive pressure, just enough to get that to ring. So you can play around with just doing the index finger and seeing if you can get those strings to ring out. You can do it with just 2 strings, little pairs of strings, to kind of test out what your index finger can handle, 3 strings, so on and so forth. So that's the first big thing to think about, is that thumb position. The thumb is important with guitar playing in general. It's going to be the guide, it's going to be the support, it's going to be the stability. So if we don't give it any attention, then certainly what is happening on the fingerboard side is going to suffer. So don't discount that. That thumb position is very critical as it relates to many things, but we're focusing on bar chords here, obviously, and that is super important. Okay, and the next thing to take into account here is going to be the index finger. A couple things with it. You want to make sure that you are positioned. It depends on I'll say this first, it depends on which bar chord shape you are using. They come in many shapes, different finger arrangements, and it is variable, but the same general principles are going to apply. So you want to be close behind that fret bar. All right, you don't want to be too far back, and that's a good general rule for just playing a single note. Right, if we get too far back, then we run the risk of getting buzz or just not getting that string to ring out. We don't want to be directly on top of the fret bar, but just behind it. All right, now for this shape, I'm keeping that index finger pretty extended and straight up and down because I have to go across 6 strings. We also have to take into account our individual hand shape. So if things are a little bit different there for you, you might have larger hands or smaller hands, and that might alter your position slightly. But with a 6-string bar chord, my index finger is very extended. I'm right behind where I'm applying pressure. I'm right behind the fret bar. And another important thing here is how many strings are you actually taking care of with the index finger. So like I said, when I was going through which frets I'm on for this chord, that index finger is only taking care of string 6, 2, and 1. So I don't need to mash all those other strings down. If I'm focused on just trying to clamp down with all the force I possibly can create and get all those strings mashed down, I'm already doing too much work. All right? And that's going to put strain on my hand, which makes it more difficult to use these fingers. My thumb is already tiring out. So you have to take into account which strings you're actually pressing down with that index finger. You don't want the general rule to just be cover all strings and press as hard as you can, right? That's probably what most people's initial approach is, which makes sense because this stuff is not super intuitive, but big thing to consider there. One more thing with the index finger, I kind of touched on it for a second a minute ago, but depending on what bar chord you're playing, which shape, the index finger might land a little bit more on the fleshy side, or you might end up rolling to the side here a little bit where you catch a little bit more bone. So depending on what strings you're trying to press down with the index finger, you have to deal with feeling whether you have the string that you're trying to press down in a little pocket and try and compensate for that or change your position. And certain shapes will allow you to kind of position on the strings in a different part of the finger, right? So I might be here or here or here. I can kind of gauge where I need to be based on how many strings I need to cover with that index finger, and which string specifically I'm playing. So for instance, that A major chord that I was already playing, I'm a little bit more extended. If I drop this to, it's the exact same shape, but different chord. So now this is a bar chord based off of an A minor chord. It specifically is a D minor chord. So I basically just took this shape and moved everything down towards the floor one string. So for this bar chord, I only have two strings that I'm taking care of with that index finger, the 5th string and the 1st string. So I can easily press down that 5th string with the pad of my index finger, just kind of lean into it. And then this knuckle is sitting right on string 1, and I can just clamp that down very lightly. All right, especially if you're making contact with bone, pretty light pressure. So I'm not even pressing down strings 4, 3, and 2. If I lift these fingers up, all right, so that's something that I was saying earlier. Don't just press that index finger, mash it down on all strings, and also consider the shape or profile that the index finger is taking for each bar chord. So it's not just one thing. That's a big thing to keep in mind. Is not one recipe for every bar chord. You have to just think through it, and I would recommend that for every single chord shape. There are simple little fixes that you can apply just by kind of working at it from different angles that will make it feel so much easier, rather than just kind of doing sheer willpower and force and going at it that way. Few other tips for you to help out. You never want to find yourself pushing your wrist out like that. Super dangerous. It's not going to feel good, and it's never necessary, right? You might see somebody playing and doing some real funky, stretchy shape, whatever. But for general guitar playing, you shouldn't find yourself pushing your wrist out like that, or for that matter, way up in the other direction. Everything should stay relatively straight there. Right? I'm not saying it's going to remain one way the whole time, no matter what you do, but you want to, practice safety there and just good health. Don't hurt your wrist by pushing, or other things in your arm by pushing that wrist out like that. I see a lot of people do that. Another one is to keep the hand compact, right? So the amount of distance that you have between the hand and the underside of the neck is something to consider. You want that to be relatively small. So that's another way where you might find your wrist popping out if everything is just way extended, and then you have this huge gap of space between your palm or wrist and the bottom of the neck. There you're losing a lot of your power and ability to put pressure on the strings, and then you're going to have to compensate for that, and certainly you're going to tire out that way. So and one other thing that can help that I've told many students is to just use a little bit of gravity. That doesn't mean that you want to be like literally pulling your hand off of the guitar while trying to grip it, but just kind of using a little bit of weight of the arm. You want to have your forearm and upper arm just kind of hanging down from your shoulder with gravity, and that is going to create a little bit of weight. So if you're sitting on those strings on the fingertips here and keeping everything compact and together, keeping that wrist up, just a little bit of weight from that arm can do a lot to get that to ring out, rather than just making it 100% perpendicular pressure. Okay? One last thing I want to comment on, because we're going to see this in the videos that are going to follow. Sometimes bar chords are called bar chords and they're not even bar chords. So what I mean by that is this one certainly is. That's based off of an E shape. This one, definitely a bar chord based off of an A shape. But then if we go to, say, something like this, based off of a D shape, it's functioning the same way, it's movable in the same way as the other two chords, and my index finger kind of looks like it's barring, but it's not, and I only need string 4 for this shape. So while everything about it looks like a bar chord and it's functioning the exact same way in that it is movable, I'm using all 4 fingers, I don't actually have to bar anything with that index finger. So if you find yourself taking care of those strings, pressing them all down while you have these fingers already in place, you're just expending energy, wasting energy there that you don't need to. So just one last thing there to keep in mind. So the videos that are going to follow are going to be bar chord scales based on the E shape, the A shape, and the D shape, or shapes. We'll be talking about major, minor, and dominant 7th chords for each of those, and I'll break those down in detail in those videos. I hope this helps, guys. Think through what you're doing. Don't just make it about just force. You know, that's where people really can get aggravated with it and frustrated and feel like they don't have a solution. And it's just taking another approach, right? Looking at it from another angle, and you'll start to answer those questions for yourself. So approach it with an open mind and caution, and be safe with it. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.